think that was the case when we that was like it wouldn't start until you had one audience member.
Oh yeah, I know Bill mentioned he was going to probably stream, so if someone wants to ask him to jump on, or someone here wants to jump on. Someone jump on.
Like now.
It should be on the Tech Talks website, or I also threw it in general a couple hours ago.
So in the world that's run, like I said, you're live.
Yeah, like this is also correct. It is live. I don't know.
You want to follow Joe? It's just fast, very fast. It's each request.
Everybody wanna join.
If you really
Somebody wanna join. Someone want to ask Bill to join?
ties into the facility and never has service.
Is Matt doing it? Are you joining?
I joined yet.
Oh, you did. Yeah, just like stay in the channel, just like mute it so you don't have to hear any of it. All right. Hey now.
So that's weird.
I think it's like 3 minutes behind, I believe. Sorry?
It's a lot of time.
Yeah.
So once you're being live.
Encourage people to participate in like a general script.
Awkward. Definitely not.
I'm like looking at your reaction on the screen.
It's so weird.
What am I weird? Just wink and scream. Patiently wait.
One more minute. Remind me to screen share if I forget. Okay. Alrighty. Alrighty, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. To everyone in the room here at Studio TWG, Boardroom 1, everyone online, everyone watching this in the future. My name is Haris. Today we'll be talking about PostCSS and the future. I'm going to share my screen before I forget. Ooh, alrighty. Play. So yes, thank you for joining us. Let's get going. I'm a developer here at the working group. Fancy picture. Follow me. Let's move on. So we'll be talking about where we were, like where did the internet come from, where we are now, and then talking about the why, the what, and the how with regards to PostCSS and why we should care. I'm expecting everyone to sort of know a little bit at least about preprocessors, not necessarily like too much, and at least know about what they are and what they're for. A tiny bit of familiarity with any build tool. I'll be doing a little demo about integrating this into Gulp towards the end. I'm going to be simplifying quite a lot of it just so it's shorter and easier to cover in this tech talk. But by all means, I definitely recommend checking out some further details if you're interested. And I've tailored this talk as more of an introductory talk, so it's easily digestible by anyone. So where we were, 1980, some dude, Mr. Tim, started working on some stuff that became HTML. I was -9. It was great. I loved it. It was fantastic. Some years later, people realized, oh, hey, it looks boring. Let's do some stuffs. So CSS, 1996. And then over the next few years, we got CSS2. They made some boo-boos. They threw out CSS 2.1, CSS 3, and then it diverged, and it's now a whole bunch of different modules. But CSS 3 is pretty sweet because we can do some really, really swaggy stuff with CSS 3. It looks awesome. But it does have its limitations. There are a few things that we would love for CSS to be able to do, but just can't. There are things ready and spec to be released soon in next versions. But what do we do for now? Well, we've been using preprocessors. Preprocessors came around a couple years ago, and they've been absolutely magical. Variables, mix-ins, functions, templating, they've really, really increased our efficiency and, just made our lives easier as front-end developers. They save time, they're easier to maintain, keeps things more organized. You can separate things out into different files and just makes sure that you're not repeating yourself all over the place. So it's been super, super awesome. But as developers, we're always looking to push things even further and try and improve on the processes that already exist. So, how do we do that? What can we do to improve upon preprocessors that already exist? What else can we do in the world of front-end development, specifically with CSS, that will help us be even better developers? So PostCSS is one answer to that question, and we'll be having a look at what it allows us to do. So PostCSS was created by the folks over at Evil Martians. You may not know the company, but you'll probably heard of Auto Prefixer. This is one of the tools that they've built. We pretty much use this in all of our projects here also. Just prevents them having to write any prefixes for your CSS. So PostCSS is just a tool for transforming CSS with various JS plugins. So at the end of the day, all of your code is written in, all of this JavaScript is manipulating your CSS and giving you an output. So it's based on the NPM ecosystem. So all of these JavaScript plugins, all these plugins for PostCSS are available on NPM, and that's how you can bring them into your project. And I'll be showing you how you can do that. It's sort of like taking preprocessors to the next level. It's like what preprocessors already have and adding a whole bunch of stuff in and around it. They're extremely modular. All these little plugins focus on very small tasks to keep their super modular. Whoops, I just pressed this faster. So you don't have to include everything. Oh no, we just dropped out. One sec. That's not good.
Did you lose your Wi-Fi?
Nope, Wi-Fi's still there. Unless I did lose my Wi-Fi. Oh no.
You can plug into that lightning cable here and use the wire.
Ah, crap. All right. Just got the beach ball. Just got the beach ball going. Oh, oh, I did lose lots of stuff. I don't know. Internet's still going. There we go. There we go. 9537. Hey, we're back. Can everyone make sure that the stream's still okay?
It's really delayed, but yeah.
All right. All right. Let's keep going.
Does this still show that you're broadcasting? Like,
Good question. Yes, it says I'm still broadcasting.
all right.
All right. Cool. Oh, I'm not screen sharing anymore. Oh, that's a close one. Entire screen. That would have sucked. All right. So all these JavaScript plugins are super modular, which is fantastic, easier to maintain. They're a lot faster. You only have to bring in what you need and nothing more. And they're a lot more powerful because they go beyond what preprocessors have. And I'll show you a few examples of that. So some people refer to it as a post-processor. And I don't really think this is an appropriate word for PostCSS because it also does what preprocessors do. And it can also do a whole bunch of other stuff that's beyond doing stuff to your CSS, like extra code generators. And I'll show you a couple examples of that. And all of these are various different plugins that work together. If you wanted to, you could just include a whole bunch of plugins that just do, stuff that Sass would do. So you sort of created your own preprocessor. You could have none of that and just have auto prefixer and other tools like that. And you sort of have a post processor. You can sort of customize it to your own requirements and your own needs. So this would be our usual workflow: Sass, Stylus, less, whatever you use, and you throw it into a preprocessor, and boom, you've got CSS. With PostCSS, they sort of run through a bunch of different plugins. Each plugin does its own unique little thing. Some of these plugins are very, very tiny and just have one small purpose, and some of them are really massive and do a whole bunch of stuff. But for the most part, most of them just do or focus on one specific thing. So let's have a look at a few examples of a few of these different plugins. So first and foremost, we've got PostCSS simple vars. This allows you to use variables in your CSS. You don't need an entire, let's say this was one of the only things you needed when it came to using your CSS. You didn't have to include or start using Sass or less or Stylus just to use variables. You can just include this tiny little JavaScript plugin, and boom, you now have variables inside your CSS, which is super nice. There's also PostCSS nested. So if you want to nest your CSS inside other declarations, then this is what you would use. We also have something called CSS nano. So this is normally referred to, or would be seen as minifying, but it sort of takes it one step further. So for example, in the case where you have padding listed as 50 pixels 0, 50 pixels 0, it realizes that it can shorten that and simplify that, and simplifies it for you, and just switches it to 50 pixels 0. Also, if it notices that there's code duplication, it'll remove that duplication by itself. So it'll just it does more than just minifying your code. It actually makes it simpler if it can, which is awesome. And obviously it removes any comments. So CSS Next, this is sort of one of the coolest plugins to use right now, because you can start using the syntax for future CSS that's actually going to be in the spec. So this is how you would declare a variable. And you can actually start using it right now, and CSS Next would convert it into today's CSS and just start working perfectly fine, which is awesome. Rights to left CSS. So this is awesome if you're developing sites that have multilingual requirements, and some of those languages have text that goes from rights to left, whether it's Arabic, Hebrew, anything like that. So you just run your CSS through this plugin, and it automatically updates all of your CSS and flips all the right and left properties over. So for example, padding, the padding value switched over, text align switched over, border width switched over. So it sort of handles that all by itself. PostCSS BEM, if you're a BEMer and you use the whole block element modifier syntax with your code, you can sort of use PostCSS to generate BEM-ready code just by using this particular syntax. Now, it sort of abstracts it one step further, and you've got add component, add modifier, and add descendant. But it's really cool. It sort of just illustrates that you can do really, really interesting and unique things with PostCSS. It's not just basic, oh yeah, prefixing and just using variables and whatnot. CSS Grace is a plugin written for taking your CSS3 to almost CSS2. Like if you're supporting really old school browsers, legacy browsers, you're using stuff like opacities and RGBA and alpha levels. You can pass it through CSS Grace, and it'll take care of all of that for you. Obviously within reason, if it's possible. Otherwise, it sort of just stays the way it is. But you don't have to worry about throwing in filters to support IE8 and IE7. It sort of just takes care of that for you. Then we have something completely different, PostCSS Style Guide. This is very similar to Guide Dog that our developer, Mark, made in-house for us. But you add in a comment block above your CSS, You throw in some markdown, you throw in a couple snippets of code, and you run it through PostCSS style guide, and it generates an HTML file ready as a style guide, which is amazing. So it's like super fast and really increases, like you don't have to waste time or spend time building a style guide. It'll just make one for you based on your CSS. Then of course, developers, like to play around, make some funs. So PostCSS Canadian style sheets, color spelled the correct way, and exclamation mark sorry instead of important, because we're just super polite. And of course, the Brits can't help themselves, so they gotta, get in on this fun. They use transparency instead of opacity, and plump instead of bold, and photograph instead of image. So English. And of course, the Australians too. Display yay nah for display none, and text indent whoop whoop for massive minus 999 pixels for your text indentation. Awesome, and there's tons more. There's a whole bunch of plugins that are available to create aliases. So for example, there's one if you don't want to write, if you're creating a box and you don't want to write width 300 and height 300, you can just write box 300. So little tiny plugins that do very small things, but they're pretty helpful. Perfectionist sort of just cleans up your code and generates like cleaner code if you're not following specific specific linting rules or whatever. Do I use will let you know whether or not some of the CSS you're using isn't supported by a specific browser. So you can say, hey, I want to make sure that this works across the board for IE9 and up. So if you end up using Flexbox, for example, it'll let you know, hey, this isn't supported in IE9. It'll actually check the whatever data is available at Can I Use and let you know right away about what your CSS can support or cannot support. So there's thousands and thousands of plugins. If you check out the PostCSS GitHub page, there's just a massive list of all sorts of plugins grouped into different categories. And I suggest that you go and explore. Some you'll find completely useless. Some you'll think is extremely useful for your own particular needs. And that's the cool thing about it. You don't need to bring in all of them. You can bring in just 2 if you want, or 30 or 50. It's entirely based on your own personal workflow, and you can tailor it to your specific needs. It's been getting a lot of attention too. A lot of pretty cool companies have started to adopt PostCSS. Google's using it, Twitter's using it, WordPress is using it. WordPress is using the right to left CSS plugin to translate WordPress.com and WordPress.org to other languages because it's supported in so many different languages. So it's really cool that they're actually using a plugin like this to improve their workflow. And last week or the week before, CodePen now also supports PostCSS, which is amazing. So you can go into the config option for your CSS, switch it over to PostCSS, and you can click on the need an add-on, and it'll show you how you can bring in a whole bunch of specific plugins. So it doesn't have all of them available, but it does have, I think, around like 10 to 15 of the most used and most common plugins for use in CodePen. What if I'm using preprocessors already? A whole bunch of us use Stylus or Sass or less. What do you do then? You kind of just like chuck it out and you have to like rewrite everything in using PostCSS? Not really, not at all. You can sort of leave your workflow identical to what it is today. And if you're like, oh, hey, this particular plugin is really cool, I really want to use it, you can sort of just add that on at the end of your workflow. So once your stylus has gone through your preprocessor and it's compiled the CSS, you can take that and throw it into PostCSS and do whatever else you need to do with your plugins. So you don't really change too much of your workflow, you're just adding more to it if you need to. So why should you use this stuff? It's awesome that you can just bring in what you need. You don't have to add in anything more than what you don't need. And certain companies may have restrictions or code practices. For example, oh hey, we don't use add extend, so don't include the add extend plugin. Like anyone who tries to use it just won't be able to, just won't compile properly. So you can really narrow down and restrict what is cool to use and what's not okay to use. And it's really, really easy to create your own. So I'm going to show you an example of, one quick thing. PostCSS on their GitHub site also has a boilerplate ready for plugin development. It sort of has the shell ready for you to create your own and has a whole bunch of really helpful documentation to build your own plugins. So this, for example, is the code for PostCSS Canadian style sheets. Just those highlighted lines is what changes the color, properly spelled color and gray values to the incorrect ones, just by one particular line. And then you have 4 lines that changes exclamation mark sorry to the important tag, which is super, super nice. So just a few lines of code will allow you to create your own specific, plugins for your needs. So at TWG, maybe, we want to create a plugin that just switches over a color value of TWG green to our specific color green. So you could write a couple lines of code and make that happen if you really needed to. You don't really need to, but it's awesome that you're able to. The problem with a lot of preprocessors is that they're really, really big. So it's really hard to find out what you need to change and where. And you have to directly contribute to the actual code base and hope that it makes it into the actual tool itself. And some of those languages that they're using to build those preprocessors are really complex also, or just not used by us. libsass, for example, is written in C++. So I don't know C++, but I do know JavaScript. So if I want to make something specific for my own needs, most front-end developers know enough JavaScript to be able to make their own plugins like this because they're so simple and so straightforward. You don't have to, go learn C++ and try and, add more codes to Stylus or anything like that. Cool, so I'm going to show you a quick demo of a really, really basic working gulp file that really does absolutely nothing, and show you how easy it is to add a couple PostCSS plugins to get your code, to get your CSS using those. Alrighty, so as mentioned, PostCSS, like all these plugins, live within the NPM world. So they're all NPM modules, and you can just bring them in, just NPM install a specific plugin, and boom, it's now available for you to use in this project. So currently in my gulp file, all I'm doing is bringing in gulp. I'm grabbing the source file that sits inside the source folder, stylus.css, and just throwing it out into the stylus.css in the destination folder. I'm really doing absolutely nothing with it right now. I have a little watch and just a gulp task just to run this gulp file. So let's say I wanted to add some simple vars. I wanted to be able to start using variables, and I also want to be able to nest my code. So what I need to do is I can just do npm install postcss nested save dev. Let me zoom in a little bit. I've already brought in simple vars. You can see that sitting inside my package.json. So I'm just going to run this and have it brought in to our project. At this point, what I need to do is sort of add those dependencies to my gulp file so I can use these. So postcss, gulp postcss. And what we do with our processors, all these different plugins, we can actually just throw them into an array instead of having to list them out individually. So I'm just going to do require postcss simple vars and require postcss nested. So I sort of have, I've got an array of all the different processors that I'm going to be using, all the different plugins, right? So in between, before I actually, generate my code, all I need to do is say pipe, use postcss, and run through all the processors. And that's it. So what this is going to do is going to grab your CSS file, run through each of the processors that exist inside this array one at a time, and then pump it out into your destinations folder. So I'm just going to save this, and let's have a look at an example. So I've got, I'm using some variables here. I've got a primary variable that's just set to whites, and I'm going to be using it here. And if I go to the side and just hit gulp. So now that gulp is running, I should be able to open up style.css and notice that the color is now updated to what I need it to be. Fantastic. And if I wanted to use nesting, I can just say dot wrapper width, 900 pixels, save, and do I need to? So wrapper, why
You
aren't you?
just fall down here with.
Ah, thank you. Perfect. Up again.
Code reviews on the fly.
Code reviews on the fly. And there you go. So just like that, we were able to, like, let's say those were the only two things that you ever need in your CSS file. So those are the only things you use your preprocessors for. You don't need to bring massive preprocessors in. We have two tiny plugins in our gulp file that are allowing us to use variables and use nested CSS syntax. And go crazy, add what you need, remove what you don't need. So it just really, really streamlines your workflow. And once you start getting to a much bigger CSS files, not having these massive preprocessors running through your code and parsing them, and just having a couple small JavaScript plugins, they'll just really, really improve your performance at the end of the day for larger projects. And that is it. I will now open it up for any questions. Woo.
I had a question about that right to left one.
Yes.
Like, how does that, do you end up building two separate style sheets?
So you would have the option of, so for example, in my gulp file right now, I sort of just threw everything into an array and just said, run through all these in one go. I don't really care. I'm just generating one file at the end of the day. You can split those up. You can just run specific ones. So you could sort of pipe out one file the way it is right now, and then you could run pipe that into another plugin that switches it to right to left and generate that as a separate file. So you have the option, as you normally would with gulp file, we normally create a regular CSS file in the minified version, for example. You could create another one that's right to left.
So like on WordPress.com, when you switch to a right to left language, you get a different set of CSS.
Yes. Yeah. Awesome, awesome. So if there are no further questions, thank you for joining us. Oh my goodness. Let me turn this off. Thank you for joining us. There'll be more TED Talks soon. I hope you enjoyed PostCSS, and here's to the future.